Hello and welcome to episode 2, Introduction to Simulator Mode. I'm your host, Sergeant Quinn. Transitioning from arcade and realistic mode to simulator mode can be a real eye-opener. You know you're in trouble when you can't even take off without crashing, and if you do make it off the runway, you have a hard time controlling the aircraft and eventually lose control. Birds of Steel really shines in simulator mode, and if you follow the advice and tips in this video, you will truly start to experience how great this game really is. First thing you need to know about is the aircraft's flap control. It should be the A button on the default Xbox simulator control setting. When you're on the ground, you have two positions, raised and takeoff. It's best to leave the flaps in the raised position at first when your aircraft starts rolling down the runway. Now, a few weight issues have to be addressed upon takeoff. The amount of fuel and or bomb loads will affect the weight of your aircraft. I recommend your fuel load should be no higher than 40%. You are just putting unnecessary weight on your aircraft if you go any higher. Also, 20% should be your minimum. You want your aircraft to build up speed before you engage takeoff flaps. I recommend letting your aircraft travel almost 3/4 the length of an online versus runway at full throttle before you engage your takeoff flaps. Later you can adjust this when you get more familiar with the feel of your aircraft. Another good indicator is after the tail pops up, engage takeoff flaps about 2 to 3 seconds later. Now don't forget to retract your landing gear, and after you gain a little altitude, put your flaps in a raised position. If you fail to do one or both and keep accelerating, the slipstream will rip the flaps and gear right off your aircraft. Now that you are airborne, you have another flap position, the most important one, your combat flaps. When you are in a dogfight and trying to make a tight turn, engaging combat flaps will slow you down to help you make a tighter turn. Combat flaps will also help you steady your aircraft while climbing to altitude. When you reach your desired altitude with your flaps in the raised position and your aircraft starts to slowly climb, you may want to adjust your trim. You adjust your trim until the aircraft levels out. I have my trim set to my X button. Usually between 1 to 3 taps will set my trim, and if the nose starts to dip down, you can reset back to 0% and start over. There are a total of 106 different aircraft in Birds of Steel, and most of them will need different control settings. The best way to do this is to set up an offline free flight mission and fly your plane as if you were in combat, diving, banking, looping, and adjust your aircraft's roll, pitch, and yaw sensitivity until you can fly without losing control. Pause the mission and click on Controls to bring up the menu. This is actually my settings for the Focke-Wulf 190A5. If I went to combat in the P-51 with these settings, I would not last long. This is my ideal setting for the P-51. Left side is lower sensitivity, moving to the right, higher sensitivity. You're going to have to experiment with the settings for your particular flying style for each aircraft. Just remember to record your settings, write them down. Most of the earlier era aircraft do not have fuel injection, like this I-16. It has a carburetor to supply the engine with fuel, and as soon as you pull negative G's, the flow of fuel to the engine stops, killing your engine. And if you do not have an engine restart button activated, you will never get it started. Pause the game and click on Controls. At the bottom left, click on Button Mapping. You now have a multitude of options to set up your aircraft. I am only going over a few to help you get started. You can set up and assign one or more different combinations of button, D-pad, and stick movements to turn on and off different systems on your aircraft. Flaps I mentioned. You can see I have the A button. Toggle air brake, I have D-pad left plus right stick. This is a control on certain bombers, which I'll be discussing shortly. As I move up and down, you can see some of the various different settings I assigned. Some buttons will already be assigned, some will not, which brings us to engine control. You will need to assign a button or combination of buttons to turn on and off your engine. I have mine set at D-pad right plus right stick. You also notice I have assigned right stick to activate a supercharger. Not all aircraft are equipped with one. An aircraft that should be, like the P-51D, you get a message stating this aircraft doesn't have it, but in real life it did. Some people claim it has no effect, plus once it is engaged there is no way to turn it off. Another important function you have to activate is zoom camera or look for simulator. I have mine assigned to left trigger. In simulator there are no indicators showing the player's name above the aircraft, and you cannot lock your view onto an enemy plane. Most of the online simulator versus matches will still have red and blue dots on the map, but some hosts will turn them off, and some will only be cockpit view, and you will need the zoom look function to help you identify enemy aircraft, but you will still need to have good aircraft recognition skills. It is inevitable. You will at some point shoot down a teammate by accident, mistaking him for an enemy aircraft. It's okay, it happens to all of us. In fact, there are reports from World War II of P-47 pilots mistaking P-51s for German 109s and firing on the P-51s, and of a German 109 mistaking a flight of P-51s for 109s and forming up with them for about 15 seconds, until the German pilot realized his mistake, banked away, now with P-51s hot on his tail. As I mentioned, you have a multitude of options. I like to keep it simple, but you can explore all the different button and also axis mapping to highly tune your aircraft. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 attempts to restart your engine in flight after the negative G fuel failure. I find it easier to rapidly hit the restart button until the engine starts. With certain bombers like this Junkers 87 Stuka, you can deploy air brakes to help steady and slow down your aircraft during a dive attack. On the Stuka, they are located under the forward section of the wings. You can see one set in the up position between the bomb and landing gear. Now let's extend the air brakes so you can get a look at them in the down position. The American SBD Dauntless dive bomber also has air brakes, much different than the Stuka. The rear section of the wings with the holes are the air brakes in the up position. Now let's extend the air brakes to get a look. If you follow the advice and tips in this video, you will be better prepared to handle simulator mode. But this is only an introduction video. The subject of combat tactics, gun conversions, and more is something I am looking at for future videos. But for now, we will end with one more flap position, your landing flaps. You can activate them as soon as you put your gear down. In versus matches, one thing that is as exciting as getting a kill is making it back to your airfield, all shot up, trailing smoke, about to run out of fuel or no fuel, and gliding in with no engine running and making a perfect landing to refuel, repair, and rearm. You are going to need your landing flaps to do it.